Yeah, we need to talk about that live call-in show. All right. How are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing so good.
Good.
So good.
Good. Why don't you introduce yourself? Let everybody know who you are, man.
Hi, my name's Ty. On YouTube, I have a channel where I talk to anybody about anything. It's called Let's Chat. And when I say I talk to anyone about anything, I mean it, but it's not so much a practice in expressing hot air in front of a person. What I'm really trying to do is help to foster critical thinking with people and try to show the power of small talk, because I think small talk can do big things. And so I really do believe when I say I can talk to anyone about anything, because what I'm trying to do is more have the conversation be less about the conclusions or like the topic that they're talking about, and be more about what drives them to have so much passion about the project, or how did they arrive at that conclusion. And I found that when you talk about those kinds of things, you give people an opportunity to think about how they arrived at their conclusions, why they love the things they love. And that tends to be a really, really engaging conversation that any two people can have about anything. And so that's what my whole thing's about. Let's chat. Sometimes when I do my talks, I've been known to go on some sideways stories or tell some jokes along the way. And I use a little bit of something called street epistemology, and I use during the show. But what I think what's really interesting is just to show that anybody, regardless of what they look like, whatever their background is, can sit up a table, can, chat with someone in an elevator, can look across a room and say, hey, I bet this guy has an interesting thing to tell me. Let's have a conversation and let's chat about it. And that's what I believe. Yeah, that's about it.
That's really, really cool stuff because, and I don't even know if you know this, but I discovered street epistemology about maybe 4 years ago. I think it was, I'd say maybe 2016, something like that. I think the first person that I saw on YouTube doing this stuff was Anthony Magnabosco. And I used to watch all his videos when they came out, stuff like that. And I started looking for other people that were actually doing that. And I ran across Cordial Curiosity. But then the third person I saw was you. And man, I was really taken by your approach. And, everybody's got their own style and way of doing it. And I really thought you were very, very, good at the street epistemology. I saw were you giving a demonstration about it, talking about it? I think it was a more formal talk or a lecture you were giving at one point.
So back in the day, I used to do when I started SC. I had a weird job. And the weird job was basically, hey, come to work for 3 days, you're off for 4 days. Then come to work for 7 days, and then you're off for 7 days. And sometimes those numbers would change, but it always led to me having a lot of free time. And I was not used to having that from like the last job I was at, like 2 jobs ago. So I had all this free time. And the weird thing is, all of my friends had normal work schedules. So when I was free, they were working. And when I was working, they were free, and things just didn't line up. And so I needed to have a hobby where I could engage with people. I needed to have a way to talk to people. And so there was a local meetup group for Atheist Society in Knoxville. That's Larry's group. Mm-hmm. And he's a mutual friend of ours. That's the backstory behind it. But basically, he had a meetup group for a bunch of atheists. And it happened every Thursday. And I'm like, perfect time, because I'm typically off on Thursdays. And I would go to those meetup groups, and I'd sit down with the people there, and I'd talk to them about whatever interested them. But what I was really interested in is, like, when you see a new face at a meetup group, it's like, so why are you here? I'm an atheist. How did you become an atheist? Or like, what was your story for atheists? Because it's always a different path for a lot of different people. Unlike Christianity, where it's like, oh, I went to church, or I had Christian parents who made me Christian. For atheists, it's always something different. And if they have a different story, I want to know what it is, but I also want to know, did they put thought into their idea of why they became an atheist? Or are they an atheist for what I would consider just as valuable reasons for why people may become, believing in a God. And so I would ask, and I'd try to like verify, like, how confident are you that, like there is no God, if that's your position? And do you think that's what atheism's about? Is it like the claim that there is no God? And I'm trying to like try to coalesce and try to see where they're coming from. And I noted that some guy was saying, hey, what you're doing right now is similar to what this guy on YouTube's doing, where he just like stands up with a clipboard and starts not complaining, but like asking people why they're religious or why they're not religious. And I'm like, whoa, that sounds really, really stressful. That'll really that'll drive my blood pressure up if I saw something like that. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to have a friendly conversation. They're like, no, it's a peaceful thing or something like that. And so when I did look up the videos and I saw a couple of examples, and at that point there was Linda Mako, who was in Sweden, who was doing talks. There was Ben Diesel, who was doing talks, and he's in South Africa, and he has a very, very interesting style. And I was realizing, yeah, there are a lot of people who are out doing this, and it's not necessarily a systematic approach, because there are some people who stand up, there's some people who have a table, and there's people who clearly are infusing it with their own, what they're comfortable with. And I realized, I have already been doing something that a bunch of people are trying to do and turn into a process. And I see behind that a scientific pursuit. And so backstory, I am a scientist. I'm currently a laboratory manager at a big company. We don't have to talk about that. But I've got my PhD in biochemistry. I love science. I love scientific approaches. I love the thoughtfulness behind methodologies, developing standard operating procedures. And so one could be made for how to engage people on very sensitive subjects, money, religion, politics. That could be a really interesting approach towards helping to, de-escalate conversations and improve dialogue, which I think could be really, really useful, in especially nowadays. It's always gotten progressively worse, but I think we have gotten into the habit of having friends on phones, and having thousands of friends. But in terms of face-to-face and being able to conduct yourself well with like good social skills with another person in front of you, eye contact, listening, active listening, things like that, we don't have that skills. And it's important to demonstrate why they're valuable. And so I love the pursuit, and I tried to document myself doing SE as well. But what I quickly learned, Scott, I'm going to tell you what I quickly learned. SE is not an excuse or a crutch for a lack of social interactions and skill set. And so what I mean by that is, if you are bad at conducting a conversation where you're not doing SE, if you're just naturally bad at that, even when you do introduce SE, you're still going to have a bad time. And you may even make SE look bad as a result, just to a cantankerous attitude, or a condescending tone, or an ability to let someone express themselves in a good way. I know I'm talking a lot, but Scott said I can keep talking.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was going to ask you that kind of leads to a question. Like, what is your trick? Like, in conversations, like, there's a lot of echo chambers. Like you said, people get used to talking to people on phones and the internet, and people are part of groups and they're part of echo chambers. And whenever they do, I noticed in my own experience, and this goes for believers, unbelievers, everybody in any sort of topic, the conversations really go downhill quick. Like, there's a lot of emotions. There are a lot of problems communicating. And I'm wondering, what is the trick for you? Because doing street epistemology it takes a certain skill set. You have to sort of step out of your own belief system in order to be objective. How do you do that? I
disagree with that.
Okay.
I disagree.
Okay, cool.
Just from the perspective. So I would take a couple of steps back and I would say, what is street epistemology? Is it a way to have a conversation, or is it what you're having the conversation about? And in my head, the way how I see it is, SE is the topic of conversation, not necessarily the means of how to have the conversation. No one can write in a book, or no one can make a video guide or here's my 3-step Amazon.com blog guide to how to be, a charismatic, well-spoken person that makes everybody comfortable around you. It's not that. You got to read the room. You got to be able to compromise with how you're behaving, the body language that you're exhibiting, and looking at the person and understanding what they're saying to you, maybe not just with their words, but non-verbally as well. That takes a skill set, and learning how to adapt to that takes practice. And so you only get good at it from doing it. And so in a sense, I say take SE and put it on the shelf for a while and just get good at talking to people. Because what I use SE, it's sort of like one tool in a toolbox of tools that I go into a conversation with. And in that toolbox, I'll have a hammer, I'll have a screwdriver, and I'll have my SE, device. But when I'm doing the talk, it's hammer, screwdriver, hammer, screwdriver. Let's throw in some SE. Great. Put the SE away. Hammer, screwdriver, hammer, screwdriver. Because in my head, SE is just what I'm having the conversation about. And it helps me focus the conversation specifically on the methodology someone's using if they make a strong claim. And I want to understand how they arrived at that conclusion. I'll say, okay, putting on the SE, what do you mean by that? How can we figure that out? Great. SE back on the shelf. Let's talk, because now we are talking about your methodology. And at that point, it's a completely different set of skills to have that kind of conversation. And it's such a nuanced thing, but I think we can appreciate it if we actually tried to look at the video, not the video, but look at examples where people are doing SE. It's a different approach for everybody. So, for example, Reed Nicewonder, you may know him already. He's Cordial Curiosity. He has a very different approach than I would say Ben Diesel would, or I do, because we have different degrees of what makes us comfortable in a conversation. And what I noticed is when you're comfortable talking to somebody, that person that you're talking to is also comfortable as well, because you kind of exude a sort of atmosphere or body language that makes the other person comfortable. So if Reed were to write a book on saying, this is how you have conversations with people, it may not necessarily reflect well with me. What a guy writes in California about how to talk to people may not work for a guy who lives in Tennessee and how to engage with people. And it can be a completely different dynamic in Chicago or New York, South Africa, Sweden. And so what we have to really be aware of is like SE, in my opinion, is how do you focus a conversation in a de-escalating manner and keep the conversation positive on the topic of a conversation being how did someone arrive at their conclusion and verify that their conclusion was actually true. But if there's no space for that just yet in that conversation, or if there's no time to start delving into that, or if maybe the person's getting a bit emotional, put the SE back on the shelf and start using your empathy, start using your hearing skills, listen to them, and being open-minded. That's part of it too. I think. What
is the goal, would you say, of a street epistemology? Just for our audience to understand.
So again, it's not so much a philosophy. It's just how do you focus the conversation on methodology? I think for me, that's the point of epistemology or street epistemology. In my mind, I can take out the term street epistemology and replace it with something like Socratic examination, which in my head is a much better definition, really, of what I'm doing, because I'm asking questions to try to figure out how someone arrived at a conclusion. That's the point of SE. But I don't always have to do that. I don't have to make the whole conversation about that. And I find that if I spend time getting to know the person, if I contribute my points of view as well, and if I'm willing to give just as much as the person is willing to give back, I actually have a much more even ground, which won't work for everybody. I won't say that's the perfect route for everybody, but I'd say it works well for me. And so if I were to take the common denominator between all these different people who are using SE in their conversations, what is the true universal factor? And I find that it is trying to keep the conversation rewarding, positive, and focused on letting the person do thinking for themselves about how they arrived at a conclusion. And if we were to break that down just 3 rules, it's just keep the conversation positive, let the person do the thinking, make it a conversation. So make it a conversation, make it positive, and let the person do the thinking. If you can do those 3 things, that's SE in a nutshell. And it could be as simple as asking somebody, oh, how'd you figure that out? And just being happy and cool about it, like non-judgmental. Like I find that is the essence of SE. And it doesn't take 40,000 different analogies that you have to have in your back pocket. Doesn't take thought experience. It doesn't take a GoPro account or a GoPro on your chest, strapped to your chest or your forehead. It doesn't take a YouTube channel. Doesn't take a book series or a tour that you have scheduled. You just have to be willing to ask somebody, how'd you figure that out in your own way, and try to keep it positive with an open mind. If you can do that, that's SE.
That's SC. And you know, I personally see the value in the Socratic approach, right? But in your own words, from your own perspective, what would you say is the real value in that approach versus say debating? Like, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of there's a debate about whether debating is better than, you know, the Socratic method and vice versa. So what would you say?
Sure. So when you're debating with somebody, you are not trying to have a conversation with them. What you're trying to do is make a fool of them in front of an audience. And if you're lucky, you get away with it. And then the audience is like, yeah, but you're not really there to change the person's mind. I mean, they're literally called your opponent. You guys are there on confrontational terms to begin with, albeit formal and polite. You are not there to have a genuine conversation with somebody. No one ever leaves a debate thinking, oh, that guy had some good points. I'm going to completely change my mind in the next 5 minutes because this guy just said. It's like, no, you're committed to what you're going to say and you're defending a position. You're defending and the other person's attacking it. And that's the way of a conversation. Contrast, you have an argument. Two people just yelling at each other. They're not really listening to each other. It's more of just emotional venting. I don't know. I hate being in arguments. I'm not really a good debater. What I do like to do is talk to people. And I found that for my style of SE, I work really good if I'm talking to somebody on a one-to-one basis. I find just that one-on-one interaction a lot better because I'm not worried about an audience. They're not worried about an audience. So we won't say things that seem extreme. If they ask me a question that puts me on the spot, it's kind of a rewarding moment where I have time to think before I give an answer. It's not have to be a knee-jerk sort of thing because nobody else is watching. And likewise, if I ask a question that makes them think, I'm willing to take a sit back. And if it takes them 2 minutes to think of a response, that's fantastic. That's showing like, you really are thinking about the things that I'm asking. And a lot of times when I have those kinds of talks with people, and I have my talks sitting down like in a park or a protest rally, library, university campus, etc. Even people who may initially, disagree with a counterpoint that I say, like if someone says, hey, I believe in a God, I'm like, okay, I can tell you where I am on that scale, and then maybe we can talk about it. And I tell them, like, I am ambivalent on the idea. I'm not saying there is no God. I'm not saying there is a God, but like I don't have enough proof to believe in a God, so I don't believe in a God. Do you understand that? It's like, yeah, but let me tell you why you should believe in my God. And then they go on their whole spiel. And then I ask a simple question, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And they're quiet for like a minute and a half. Those talks are so good that by the end of them, they don't want to get up. They don't want to walk away. And so I have like, I really do like those moments, but I also don't like to, how do I put it? It's not a therapy session, right? So like I have a timer that's like 5 minutes. I'm not there to waste their time. But if the time's done and I want them to think about the responses a bit more, I'm willing to say, hey, come back and maybe we can talk. Or, this is a cool conversation. I've done everything I could at this point. I think from here on out, like these are things that you should think about. And if we ever do see each other again, or if you want to see some of my other videos, here's my card. And I think we had a great time. It's like, yeah, just leaving on that positive note before they had a time to find a reason for me to be like a jerk or something like that, and just sit on the conversation does amazing things. And what I like to cheerlead, what my SE is about, is those moments where the conversation's over and you're still thinking about the conversation, and that's where the real work begins. Like that's awesome. Where the person has nobody else around them, and it's just them and their own thoughts and them recycling their ideas. And the best thing possible is if they come up with a different thing that they said when they were talking to me, because even if it was a marginally better excuse, say they go from the Kalam cosmological argument, right, to like something a bit more substantial or specific to their specific God claim, that's an improvement because they've gone from a worse epistemology to a slightly more rational one. And it's that small step that gives them a momentum to hopefully get to somewhere that's a lot more stable. And if it does point to a specific God in a rational way, I want to know about it too. So maybe it just progresses everything in the better perspective. So
exactly, that makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, I've had some interactions in the past where normally when I'm speaking to people, it's been a positive interaction, but sometimes I'm thinking of a couple years ago, I was speaking to, I think he was either a Christian minister or whoever, and he already identified, oh, you're trying that street epistemology on me, like some sort of technique. And I was like, well, it's a way that I engage with you, to talk about epistemology. And he was saying, well, you do know that all that is it's a tool atheists use to convert people into atheists. That's the whole point behind it. And he mentioned the book by Peter Boghossian.
Yeah. So in my opinion, there are a lot of limitations with SE, and it's largely due to there's things that are within SE that are limitations, and there are things that are outside of SE that are limitations, right? And I would say of the things that are outside, one, it's a very poorly named thing, right? It's the sort of word that from a person who's gone through academia and I started from the bottom, now I'm here, or whatever you want to call it. Right? But like,
all right, Drake.
I've heard a lot of people use fancy words to try to sound just for the sake of verbosity, just for the sake of sounding important. Street epistemology is one of those things where it's like, that's a word that tries to sound very, very, very fancy when it's a very, very simple thing, asking people how they figured stuff out, right? Like there's terms in SC that are very long, like for example, interlocutor, which is classically the term, but if you were to say interview partner, it's the exact same number of syllables, and it's something that most people will understand far more than interlocutor. If I called someone my interlocutor, they may be offended. Interlocutor, interview partner, is the exact same thing, but I feel it's a much more gracious terminology. That said, so I feel like it's a term that was produced for sake of sounding more academic,
you're right,
to aspire to something. Likewise, it's made by a guy who, in my opinion, is a really nice guy, but not very particularly who, I will say it like this: he's willing to let his publicist come up with ideas to sell his ideas in a more aggressive format than to think long term and format the scope of what he's trying to do. Like if he's trying to set up a movement, what would be the better term for setting this up? What would be the better book title for this? No, I can sell 20% more books if I call it Manual for Creating Atheists. Let's go with that, Brandon. Brandon, high five. Oh yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of things that put this system, if I were to say it, on a bad foot. And I would also say this too, like generally outreach is not very good in this community either. Like there's not a lot of Black street epistemologists. There's not a lot of women street epistemologists. They tend to just mostly be white men. And if you were to look at atheist groups in general, it's mostly white men, because it nothing bad with white men. Nothing bad, but they tend to dominate other cultures very, very well. Like there's a really good history of just being like, oh, are these flowers on your hat? We're gonna do that. Oh, is this where your land is? Yeah, that's our land now. It's just the whole manifest destiny of, yeah, we're gonna play our music at our conventions, we're gonna dress in our way at our conventions, we're gonna have our food at the conventions, and anything else is like this new thing, but it's not our thing. And we can have our token members, but our culture is this. And it seems to push out a lot of other different ideas, and I can feel that even in this community. And that's why one of the big things for me was Black Lives Matter, and I didn't get a lot of support with that, even within the SC community. And so that really made me think, okay, if this is the case, what is SC, and does it really reflect a community group, or like a social movement, or is it literally what gravitated me to it? Is it literally just a means of having a good conversation with somebody, or am I already capable of having a conversation with somebody, and SC is just a way to pinpoint that conversation on how to talk about that methodology in a productive format? And I think looking back, anybody, even from the way how I approached SC, like I was already sort of doing it before I knew about, the prominent members in the group. And I found that a lot of people have the capability of having good conversations with people about sports, video games, favorite movies. it's that same tone, it's that same engagement that they can use and apply it to more sensitive topics. Don't treat it like it's a big deal. Don't treat, these conversations about religion and politics as if it's a fundamentally crazy issue. Just ask about the methodology that someone used to arrive at their conclusion. And I can tell you why it's valuable, because people put a lot of ego in themselves. They care a lot about who they are, and they invest a lot of time in themselves, working out, eating well, all that stuff. People invest almost same amount of effort into the things they love, the conclusions that they hold. They protect them very, very strongly, sort of like a guy holding onto a balloon, right? But there's no attention, very, very little attention of what connects them to that conclusion. It's sort of like the string attached to the balloon. No one cares about the string. Everybody cares about the balloon. And it's that string that's really important, because if that string is weak, or if that string is, dangerous or on poison or on fire, it's better for them to not have that connection anymore. But you can't cut it for them. What you can help them do is help them look at the string themselves and say, is this string a good connection, or is it a bad connection? Because I clearly love this thing a lot. But if this is a bad string, or if its string connects to something completely different, I want to make sure that I'm aligning myself with the best mode of thinking that gets me to my conclusion. And if I can't get there, and even if I'm helping them get there and we can't get there together, that says a hell of a lot more than me saying cut that string, because they'll cut it themselves. They'll find a better string to get them to a better conclusion or the same conclusion. And either one of those things are good things, because they'll have a better method or they'll have a better conclusion. And I found you don't need a process for that. There's no process needed for that. You don't. It's while it's great to have a community, and you're part of my community too, Scott. You're a great guy, and I had to make my own community too. But you absolutely can, if you're watching this, start conversations with people that are just as excited and just as easygoing as the things that you love to talk about. Olympics, Pokemon, whatever you want, anything what you would consider trivial, and have those same kind of vibes when you're talking about the more delicate subjects, because you can exude a confidence and you can keep the conversation focused on methodologies in a way to avoid all those ego-based minefields, and still leave with a positive conversation where you let somebody think about how they arrived at a conclusion. And I think that is a beautiful thing. It doesn't take a YouTube channel, it doesn't take any radio or anything like that.
Well, yeah, it's I agree with you. It's like the win in that conversation is when people have something to think about. You can make someone question or think. And I love that analogy about the connected strings to the balloon. Check that out. It's kind of like when your math teacher, you can get all the answers right, but she wants to check your work. Let's find out, did you write down how you got to that answer? That's just as important, or if not more important, than the actual answer. It's like, how did you get there?
Exactly.
Let's check the work. Let's check your work,
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say exactly that's it. When I became an atheist, my whole process was, I thought I knew what morality was because I had the 10 Commandments. Like I literally, and then I go to college and I had an ethics class or a morality class, right? And I thought, I'm going to ace this class because I already know like the 10 basic rules you need to be a perfect person. And it turns out that like knowing morality isn't knowing a list of rules, in the same way that knowing math isn't having the answers at the back of a book, right? Like knowing math is knowing how to do math, how to get those answers. That way, if the question's different, you know how to still get the right answers. It doesn't matter if you have an answer sheet. Like you need to know how to do math. And so when I realized that math is a process and not so much just a list of rules, it blew my mind, because I would read the Bible and I'll be like, these go against all the machinations that I can come up with in terms of what are long-term consequences if you say, don't ever, 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 ever steal. I'm like, wait, couldn't there be a circumstance where that might be okay? Like what? Like, no, it's always bad. I'm like, is it always bad? Like, don't ever question me. I was like, ooh, I know that one's bad. I know that one's bad. And so I would love for SC to be in that same kind of freestyle perspective. It shouldn't be, in my head, a series of rules of do it like this, say these things at this point. When someone gives you this argument, respond in this way. Think about this while someone's giving you their life story. I would prefer if it was more of like, be genuine, have a positive conversation with somebody, let them do the thinking. That's it. and do whatever makes you comfortable, because that's going to make the other person comfortable too. And as
Well-
long as you keep the focus on how do you arrive at that conclusion, you're good. That's SE. And then otherwise, just talk to the person. I think you'll
Well,
be
you
great.
had three. You had mentioned to me one time. I asked you a good formula, and you mentioned three basic over like a skeleton outline, basically.
Yeah.
What are
Yes.
those? Go ahead and let
All
everyone know.
So it sounds counterintuitive, especially to what I was just saying, but like from my scope, when I go into like the SE Discord, it's like, here's the 26 best rules to respond when you're given like an argument from ignorance. And I'm reading this, I'm like, you guys are making this way too complicated. You guys are making this way too complicated. And not only that, but like none of you guys have ever really done SE.
You're right.
There's just a lot of just armchair guys of being like, yeah, I would do it like this. I had a chance doing it. I did SE once. I talked to a guy on the phone. He was trying to sell me Sirius XM for my car, and I was like, why do I need it? And then I hung up the phone. And that's SE. That counts. And I'm like, how many of you guys have actually sat down and talked to somebody and made sure you weren't hurting their feelings when you're asking like some of these questions on the list? They're kind of formatted in a very, weird, arbitrarily robotic sort of fashion.
Mhm.
And basically I was saying like, you can take all of SE, or you can take all of the questions that are in SE and basically boil them down to just the three most important ones that move a conversation, in my opinion, in a productive and open-minded way, where you're not asking yes or no questions. You're not setting up baits for gotcha moments. You're not snatching water bottles out of people's hands and being like, well, if it's true to me that this water bottle belongs to me, like, you're not doing any of that. No take backs. And so here would be my three basic questions. The first one, how did you figure that out? Right? And you don't have to literally say, how did you figure that out? There's a lot of different ways you can format it to make it seem like, or let me back up even further. Actually, I'm going to do them in order if you don't mind. So the first one that I love is, what do you mean by that? Right? What do you mean by that is a great question, and you can format that any way you want. But what do you mean by that is a clarification question. You want to understand what they're talking about before you take your assumptions and you start tackling them. If someone says, I think, I want to try to pick a neutral topic. So forgive me if I've seemed a little, trivial, but if someone says, I think spaghetti is the best pasta, right? You can just ask somebody, what do you mean by that? Like, and it seems like a simple thing, but their idea of what spaghetti is can be a completely different idea from what your idea of spaghetti is.
Right.
You might have the same vocabulary, but you may have completely different definitions underneath that. And so what that helps by asking, what do you mean by that, is you understand what they mean when they say the words, not what you assume they mean. And that gives you just a point for you to understand, all right, what are we talking about? Where are my biases in this? Let me set them aside. This is what we are having a conversation about. Even if I would call that a different thing, at least I know what you mean when you say that. So like, wait, when you hear like God does this or God does that, or that's a sin, you don't have to be like, oh, well, I know what a sin is because my pastor told me about that when I was 12. It's like, no. You're talking to a person right now who has an idea what sin is. Ask them what they mean by that, right? Ask them what they mean by their God. Get an idea of what they're talking about and try to get some firm terms. If you can't get there, that's totally fine, but at least you made the effort. But you need to know what you're talking about before you have a conversation about that thing, right? The next thing is, how do we test that? Or how can we figure that out if that's, if that's actually the case? Or like, how do we know that? Make it a team project. The main thing that I like to include is the we, because it's not just, how do you know that? How did you figure that out? That's true. Make it, how can we figure that out if that's true? How can we, how can we make a test to show that that's the case? If someone's like really, really confident that, for example, intelligence is genetically given to your kids. So if you have two smart parents, that kid will automatically be smart. It's like, well, can we test that? Like, is there a way that we can figure that out? If that is true or not? Let them do the thinking. It's not a yes or no question, right? And they can give you maybe a test, or maybe the recent thing that they've used to determine if that is the case or not. And you're not being judgmental. You're literally trying to figure out how we can come together and try to figure out if that's true or not. The last question is, how reliable is that test? And in my head, the reliability of that answer, regardless of, whatever they tell you, is basically the measured of how much justified confidence you can put into it. So if they say, well, it's about 60% reliable, it's about 50% reliable, or it's not reliable at all. Maybe they don't give me a percentage. Maybe it's just like, well, I still don't know. I don't know if that test is reliable or not, but I still believe it. it brings up an interesting thing of like, well, why believe it if, we don't have a reliable way to test it?
Mm-hmm.
And if we care about whether or not it's true, let's just keep working on a better way to figure out how we can demonstrate that to be the case. And we can talk about belief after the fact. And we can just focus on the method that we are using to know that it's true or not. And until then, we can just say it's an unknown variable. Or until then, we can just say, we're still working on it. We have a hypothesis, which is totally fine to have in science, but we're not putting weight on it in terms of like a conclusive statement. We're just working towards a test that can help to show if the hypothesis is true or
Mm-hmm.
not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that takes the conversation slightly away from, I'm very impassioned about this and I believe it's true, but I don't have a reliable way to determine it, to, I've had a conversation with somebody who asked me what I believed and heard me out. He asked me how we could test it, and I didn't really have a good way to test it. And now I'm going to think of better ways of how we can test it, so that way I could either, one, have a better method to reach my conclusion, or maybe I should put some nuance on my conclusion and maybe take a little bit of a step back. I still like the conclusion, but I don't have to believe it as much until I can have a better method. That's a thought process. That's that one step that I think we can all benefit from. And in my head, that's SE. What do you mean by that? How can we test that? Is that test reliable? That's basically what SE is. Outside of that, we're just having a conversation. And, you can freestyle. You don't even have to ask them in that order. You can start anywhere you want. You can phrase them any way you want. But genuinely, that's where I feel like those 3 questions matter in terms of like how I would format my SE moving forward. And, it's been really interesting trying it out, because without a camera, and just talking to people in that like 3 question-ish format, and like maybe going back and forth, I found that I've had just as much progress as I did when I knew like all of the most trendiest analogies, the Tic Tac analogy or the armadillo analogy, the Lamborghini analogy. I'm just like, I think all this stuff is just obfuscating, which is possibly the most important part of SE, which is helping somebody else do the thinking and not doing it for them.
That's right.
And if that's the case, then SE may not necessarily be a process. SE could just be an opportunity to talk about something. And past that point, it's up to the person who's conducting the interview or having the conversation to use their own natural set of social skills to make progress. And however they choose to make progress is up to them. But SE is the open door, and it's not the elevator path or the walking sidewalk through the door. And so when I think of SE, I don't think of it as a process anymore. I think of it as strictly just a target on a wall. And I'd be like, if we talked about this thing and I let you think about this thing, we may have a really good, productive conversation. And that's really changed the way how I thought about SE. It's not a popular concept, just letting you know.
Yeah. And it's something that has grown in popularity. And I think the really big attractive thing about it is, like you said, it opens up a more progressive conversation, because you can take any conversation, any topic that may be too sensitive to talk about. You know how people say, well, there's 2 things I never talk about, and that's politics and religion. Well, this is a way, right? And this is a way you can actually talk about it without talking about it. But you're actually talking about the more important aspect of really any topic, which is how do you come to the conclusions that you've come to, and just talk about that. And then that's a really good way to get people to think. And I think the goal, I mean, personally for me, I think the goal is just to kind of get people to examine their reasoning abilities and try to refine them and get better at them, because it doesn't come naturally, does it?
It does not come naturally. You're very right about that. Critical thinking is something that everyone assumes they have, but is not something that is freely given without effort. As simply put as that. I would say this, the more systematic, and this is just a warning, because I know my concept of SE is not the prevailing concept of SE, and I'm fine with that. I guarantee you that there will be, as this gets more popular, more people who think of SE in different ways. And I encourage that. It's not something that can be contained. And I'm also fine with, if someone said, hey, what you're doing is not SE, I'm like, that's fine. I'm having more fun doing what I'm doing than But good luck to you. In my opinion, if you want to climb a tree, climb a tree. If you want to go on a picnic, go on a picnic. If we're both having a good time, guess what? We're both having a great time. Like that's the end of the day. And I appreciate effort in just trying to communicate with people regardless. But I would warn that the more systematic SC becomes, the more that there's a formatted tier list of responses and not necessarily closed, but like 3 steps away from being a closed question, and analogies that are being used, and the prevailing idea that I'm an SC or I'm right, you're the person who's talking to me, you're wrong, and here's how I used SC to show that you're wrong, right? Like the more examples we have of that, the more we make it easier for dishonest theists, most likely, I'll just say it plainly, to take SE, which could be good for them as well, and try to turn it into a thing that could be misconstrued as a nefarious tool to make people be more sinful, because that's a very easy narrative for people.
Well, I've seen it kind of flipped around, where I've seen some apologists and ministers try to take the SE approach to convert people into Christianity. Like there's a lot of videos now out about that. Like forget that guy's name. He used to be a street apologist or street evangelist, and then he started to incorporate. He's like, I'm going to start using street epistemology against those atheists, and I'm going to use their method because if they can use it to convert people to atheism, I'm going to use it to convert people. So it's kind of missing the point, you know. It's like you can use that tool for anything, and you should use it for everything, really. So I don't think it's necessarily a tool for converting someone to one thing or the other necessarily. It's just a way of helping people examine their reasons.
Now, that is a fair statement, but here is me, even as the atheist who has done SE for multiple years now. The book is called The Manual for Creating Atheists, right? Like the more you fight that, the harder it is, the worse it looks on everybody. Like when you search street epistemology, that's the first thing that pops up. That's the first thing that pops up on streetepistemology.com. That's the book that's being sold in the bookstore on the store page, right? So like at a certain point, it's sort of like not necessarily a lost cause, but it's more of like, if you are an atheist talking to religious people and you are doing SE, try to own the idea of, like, in a sense, what's being done. You are essentially just trying to engage critical thinking in somebody else. They are a theist, but you are asking essentially questions where you're not telling them not to believe in God. You're trying to help them think critically. And if it leads to them saying, I don't believe, not necessarily, I don't believe in this God, but I don't have as good of a reason as I thought I did. And that's a good thing, because here's what I want to highlight. If the conversation ends with a Christian saying, you know what, I didn't have very good ideas for why I believe in my God, but I still believe in my God. I'm going to go look for better reasons to believe in my God. And I'm going to tell them to you the next time I see you. That's, in my opinion, just as good as someone saying, oh, well, I don't know why I believe in this God anymore. And I feel like we don't have as many opportunities to hear that, because not as many people are forthcoming about what they don't know, and are willing to immediately switch gears and be like, hey, I didn't know that, but I'm going to work harder to figure that out, so that way I can come back to you. And because I really am proactive, and I found a lot of good things in this belief system, and I feel like there is something still substantial here, but I'll consider how to get there in a more, not necessarily convincing way, but a more rational way. That way I can get you on board too, because it seems like you are open-minded as well. If I have a rational way to get there, maybe you'd be more convinced to think in my fashion, and maybe be more willing to be convinced that my God's true. Like, you don't hear that from Christians enough, because it's not trained on their part to embrace an unknown in that capacity. And so really what the SE conversation is between an atheist and a Christian is to shake that sense of doubt
and confidence
into them, and let them realize, not necessarily about their God belief, because I don't care what the God belief is. I just want you to appreciate doubt as a concept, because doubt as a concept is a thing that is always in your favor.
It's a virtue.
In my opinion, confidence is the thing that's saying you can fight that tiger, jump in that tiger pen. You are awesome. I love you. That's confidence. Confidence will tell you things that'll make you jump off a cliff. Doubt's always like, I don't know if you can fight that tiger guy. I know you can do. I know you did that whole P90X workout. I know you did. I know you feel really great. But first of all, I'm sure it might be a little bit too tight on you. And it's been a while since you did a sit-up. Can you do a sit-up? I've not done a sit-up in a while. Maybe I can't do this. I'm not telling you you're a bad person. I'm just saying maybe you can't do this. In my opinion, the doubt voice is on your side. The confidence voice is just talking. And it sounds great, whatever they're saying, but it's not always on your side. And so
go right.
Sorry, just to wrap this up, I would say as the SCer, even within it's an atheist to a Christian or a theist of any kind, I'm more of a cheerleader of doubt, such that they can go from 100% confidence to 98% confidence, and I'm fine with that. Still believe in your God, still walk away with your God belief, but have a healthy amount of doubt in your body, because 0% doubt is the worst state of being that you can be in when it comes to anything that you put a lot of value in terms of believing. Because why believe in anything so absolute that you are literally closed-minded to anything else? Is that the kind of God or is that kind of heaven that you want to be around, with a bunch of other closed-minded people who just did nothing else, but were like, nope, this is the God, I'm not looking at anything else. Oh, I'm so lucky it turned out to be the right God. So great. It wasn't Vishnu. Oh, I'm so wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
I just blinded my way towards this one thing and I got it. And I was like, I'm in. It's like, is that the God you want? Or do you want the God who reflects the idea that, oh, this person is looking at all the other options. This person is hearing what the atheists are saying. They're considering what that, and yet they still have belief in me because they found a good way to reach the conclusion that I exist.
Well, there may be a thing called hyper-skepticism. Do you think that you can be skeptical about your own skepticism? Like, there's a lot of people skeptical about climate change, or they're skeptical about COVID-19. Is it really real? Some of the things are surrounding that topic. Is there a way to be too skeptical?
Yes, it's always a balance. You can always have 100% doubt, which is bad. In my opinion, I call that, like, you can always believe in something 100% or 0%. And you should never, in my opinion, be absolute about anything, even like the logical absolutes, which we can't falsify because we have to assume that they're true to even try to falsify them, right? But like, because we can't falsify it, let's not be absolute in them. Maybe just by virtue of the fact that we can't test it, we should at least be the most confident in like something that's called a logical absolute. Sorry if this is getting too nerdy, but if anything, you could be 99% confident. You could be 99.999. You could be so confident that, you know, you would have to be an amazing circumstance for you to change your mind, but you should still know what would it take for you to change your mind. And it should be more than just, well, I'd be dead. And that way I know. It's like, no, that's not knowing. That's called being dead. You should like have a line in the sand that you're aware of what it would take for you to be like, well, I wasn't ready for that. But if I see that, that will be the thing that'll make me reconsider everything else. You need to have that standard, because that standard is what keeps you rational. And without a standard, without any sort of criteria for what you believe in, you are at best just hoping to be lucky. But
hoping, right. Exactly. I think that it's healthy to have markers for yourself for any belief or unbelief about things. Like, have you established a marker that would say, well, if this marker was met, then I would lower my confidence, or if this marker was met, I would actually raise my confidence. That way you kind of know you're being rational and you're not just closed-minded, or as they call in academia, doxastically closed.
Yeah. And so in my book, I would say the book shouldn't have been called A Manual for Creating Atheists. It's more of like a manual for creating skeptics, right? Because that's literally what the goal is. And it just happens to be the case that skepticism is a thing that is lauded in, at least in atheist communities, though it doesn't necessarily mean that all atheists are good skeptics. Right. Because in my opinion, there are a lot of people I do SC with who are atheists who have just as many problems. And it's just as frustrating to talk to them. But someone that's engaged in critical thinking that genuinely loves it, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with that. You're one of those people, the people on the Digital Free Thought radio show are the similar ilk. And I would say it's good to see skeptics, because I'd rather talk to, in my opinion, a skeptical Christian right, and have a very
Mm-hmm.
meaningful conversation with them than a closed-minded atheist. And so, if anything, the thing I don't like about the book Manual for Creating Atheists, which I haven't read, by the way, I should probably read that,
Me too.
is is it should have been called the Manual for Creating Skeptics. It
Mm-hmm.
probably gives atheists a little bit too much credit. And if people are like, "Oh," it's like, no, that would be my takeaway. It's like it gives atheists too much credit to call it, say, creating atheists, because really the end of an SC conversation is you've hopefully inspired someone to think skeptically
Mm-hmm.
and critically, and that is the true mark. Yeah. So if you turn out to be an atheist, that's great. But if you're a skeptical atheist, that's
Even
substantially
better.
better. And if you're
Well,
a skeptical Christian, I'll take it.
well, me and Katie, Borg Skeptic, we used to be Jehovah's Witnesses, so we have a
Oh,
background in systems of thinking and systems of organized religion that don't really take too highly, don't think too virtuously of things like skepticism. Those aren't really good things for the way in that background.
right.
But coming out of that religion, we see the virtue in being skeptic and doubting and really testing your work and testing your beliefs. What was your background that led you to atheism and skepticism?
How much time do we have?
Just a few minutes, I think maybe 20 minutes, I guess.
Okay. So I touched a little bit on the idea of morality and college
Mm-hmm.
and realizing like, oh, it's not just a symptom, it's not a system, but I didn't necessarily call myself an atheist at that point, right? Like I would say, well, I'm religious, but I'm still spiritual or something like that. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
going through that whole transition. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had the opportunity to work in Sweden as one of my first jobs for a year. I feel like I lost almost all my Swedish, but I was so good. I'd walk into a store and I'd be like, "Yeah, behöver cough drops." Like I need cough drops.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd be like, "Oh, we in it," and they're all black licorice flavored because they loved it back then. And I would get
Mm.
taxis, and they'd drive me to the wrong place. I'd be like, "You're trying to screw me. I know these roads." I'm saying it in Swedish. And they were like, "Oh, he knows, and he knows. We're still driving you in." And I was like, "That's fine. My boss will pay for this." But when I was in Sweden, you'd be surprised how many atheists are there and how open it is. And
Mm.
it's almost as if being religious is like what being an atheist is here, right?
Mm-hmm.
In America, it's like sort of like looked at like, what? Why are you religious? It's almost
Mm.
by default that you're not indoctrinated as a child. And so religion is sort of like this weird, we will use a church to maybe have a ping pong tournament or get married, but we don't say vows with like a minister or anything like that. It's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I realized that pressure was off me, it was a lot easier for me because I was listening to Atheist Experience at the time. And I even downloaded a book on my Kindle called Atheist for Dummies. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized everything I was hearing in that book applied to me in a way where I was like, I don't feel any different. I just know what the words are that defined a part of me. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, so like there's no real changes. I just gave myself a better opportunity to express a part of myself that I've always loved, but I just never gave an opportunity to. And it was just atheism. Like I don't believe in a God. And now I know the term for it. And I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was a bad thing, but it's actually not a bad thing. And so why did I think it was a bad thing? Because I just had all this, upbringing that told me it was bad, but there were none of those people who were telling me those things were atheists. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I heard it from the own mouth, I was like, so I'm not non-religious. I'm not spiritual. I don't believe in a God, and that's not it. That's it. That's the end of the story. And I figured that out in Sweden. When I came back to America, I was like, guys, you won't believe it. I'm an atheist, and nobody liked it. And I was like, oh, here we go again. Okay, so let me go to those meetup groups and start talking to other atheists because I forgot to figure out how they dealt with that and how they asked people the right questions. And that's how I fell into street epistemology. Is just like here's a good way to talk to people about stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's really heavy in the culture here. I lived in Europe for some years, and I was just speaking to someone else from Europe today, and we were both talking about this. Is that in Europe, and I was living in Germany.
Ooh,
And
cool.
and there's like a totally different approach to religion. And there's churches, there's cathedrals, there's all kinds of stuff like that, but it isn't the same. And you even have a choice, like how here we pay taxes, and we don't really give a say. I mean, except maybe through our local and national representatives when we vote them in. But in Europe, you sign a paper when you pay taxes. Do I want my money to go support the church or not? And you can check off no. And so it's like that. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of extreme. Like, really? And they're like, oh, yeah. Here in Germany, we're not very, dogmatic. We don't take church that way. It's something it's personal and things of that nature. And it's not really secular at all. It's not religion isn't in the secular. It's like, it's all secular, and religion is kind of like in the background, and it's more traditional and historic and things of that nature, not really in your face like in America. So it was a totally different experience for me coming from my background. So
sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But there are Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany, which was really weird.
My mom's a Jehovah's Witness, right?
Yeah, you told me that. That's amazing. You were never a witness though, right?
No, so she converts. So I'm not one to tell you what my mom's thought process is, but she is hard of hearing. She can hear now, but she's hard of hearing. And so we were raised sort of like with a deaf parent, deaf single mother, right?
Gotcha.
And so you needed support structures to survive, basically, and raise kids, if you're a deaf parent, right? Especially if you're a deaf single parent. Holy crap. And so, because my dad died when I was really young, that's a different story. But anyway, my mom would oftentimes go to churches to find a community, babysitters, people to help her move, just people to help watch her kids and stuff like that, so that she can foster us growing up. And Jehovah's Witness, there weren't enough Jehovah's Witnesses for that to happen. My aunt was a Jehovah's Witness, but my mom was like, yeah, that's not going to work. I need to be Baptist. And when we moved to a different state, we were Pentecostal. When we moved to a different state, we were Methodist. And then we were evangelical, just depending on where we were and what was the nearest church nearby. And so I got to get a lot of flavors of Christianity. And it all kind of blended together for me. But then when I moved out and started my academic career, and when my sister moved out and started a military career, she needed a support network. She needed people to talk to. And it turns out that a lot of deaf people gravitate towards church to find other people who are also deaf that they can speak with and have, community with. And for her, that was through Jehovah's Witness. Like she got tapped on that. And so in my head, I can definitely see that if there wasn't that social aspect, she probably wouldn't be one today, but now she's fully in it. And I won't try to say anything other than the fact that she does love complaining about them when they're not around. But I feel like that goes part and parcel with Jehovah's Witness. I feel like everyone's like, yes, Sister Mary, yes, Brother Joseph. And then when they're home, like, can you believe that guy got another Cadillac? What's going on with this rhythm? Yeah, what's up with that? She had she had socks all the way up to her ankles. They should have been up to her kneecaps. What's going on there?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of unrelated, but I know, I don't know what it is now. I haven't really looked at it or spoken to anybody about it. But back when I was a Jehovah's Witness, it was kind of popular to say within the witnesses, but even outside, at least I would hear it a lot, is that Jehovah's Witnesses appeals to the African American community. That's something I kept hearing coming up, and I kept hearing even within that. Do you think there's anything to that? Or is that true? Or what do you think about that? I've never really discussed too much with that.
I'm not enough of a Jehovah's Witness to even tell you. Like I've seen, I know when my mom said, I'm a Jehovah's Witness now. I'm like, cool. Can I see your Bible? And she showed it to me, and it still had the same verses about slavery in it. And I'm like, yep. Okay, great. That's one thing I don't have to read anymore. And she's like, no, read this yellow book that I got. That's a compliment to explain. It's like the book says you can keep slaves. I'm totally good without it. Like that's my litmus test for your holy book. And so as a Black person, come on, for crying out loud. So it breaks my heart when I see it the other way. But no, I've not been enough of a Jehovah's Witness to know if their outreach is particularly good. I do know that there's a global presence. And I think like that's really beneficial compared to like say Mormonism, which is very much Utah, right? And it's like they didn't let black people in until like the 1940s or something like that.
Right. I was
Like,
going to say, yeah, that.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
even the 70s. I think it was even
Oh
later than that.
gosh.
I was going to say Mormonism seems to be that they always say that appeals more to the white culture in America, and Jehovah's Witnesses appeal. That's the going joke or whatever. But
it could just be
I don't know how true it is. Yeah, and in slavery, and me and Katie, we talk about this all the time. Like, you know, we'll talk to different Christians and, you know, debate different Christians, and they'll be talking about, you know, making excuses for slavery or saying that it didn't happen in the way that we're thinking about slavery. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, though, they kind of embraced all that stuff 100%, like even proud of it. Like, you know, this is what Jehovah commanded. This is what Jehovah regulated. Yeah, so what? That's great.
Yeah.
Jehovah's strong, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I don't like the so what mentality, but I do appreciate the fact that they're not sugarcoating it at the same time too.
They just embrace it. Like, that's just part of Jehovah's virtues, or that's a reflection of his personhood. And I'm just thinking, it's so weird that when we were witnesses, we never questioned that. Like, we never questioned the epistemology of why should slavery be a moral thing. It was never questioned, but only until after we leave do we look back at it and use it as a criticism, you know?
Yeah, it's a thoughtful question that you have to formulate and have, if anything, have someone ask you. It's not something that just naturally comes about spontaneously. And that's why I find like having SC conversations are so valuable, because you do inspire those moments in people to think like that, because it doesn't happen within their own community. In my opinion, that's sort of telling, but it's very easy to produce a culture that protects itself by not asking the questions that the culture knows not to ask, to the point where the people in the culture don't even know that that's a question that to ask.
Right.
That can happen enough times where like that's just a perfectly encapsulated, you know, a dog biting its own tail and think it's another dog. Like, that is a culture that's just spinning in circles. But I feel like, again, you have to ask yourself that question to be able to start getting out of it. And documenting, asking those questions have been really helpful for me. Like, I'll go on my YouTube channel and I'll still see comments from people being like, wow, that was really good. I'm going to try that. Or this video, I didn't think you could talk about gun control in that way. This is really great. I just find that the smallest things that you do can have the biggest impacts on people. And so if anything, I would encourage, but one of my last words would be, if you're interested in doing SE and you have an idea of how you can do it in your own way, Christian or an atheist or whatever, but if you value skepticism and you want people to be more skeptical and more critical thinking, and you want to try to inspire people to say, I don't know, and you want to be able to say, I don't know yourself, out, like even on camera, and just show that it's okay to do that. Start. You'll be so glad you started after you start. Don't think about it any other way. Just start doing it, and you don't have to record it, you don't have to document it, but if you get more comfortable doing it, I would highly encourage it, and you'd be really thankful that you at least started the process, because it's a very rewarding thing to look back on and say, wow, that was pretty cool.
That's right.
I had a good conversation with that guy. I can do that still now. I feel great about that.
Well, you know, every Sunday, you're hosting the radio show, the Free Thought Radio.
I'm slowly becoming the host, but Larry's still the host.
He's the host. But and it's a great. We have these conversations. We always have a different topic. I encourage anybody to look at the YouTube channel. You know, if you can see that it's on Let's Chat, your channel.
Yeah.
And it's every Sunday. We do these conversations. We have a really good time. And in this show right here, this has been great talking to you. It's always fun talking to you and discussing these sort of topics. It's near and dear to my heart, as it is to you and Katie. So really enjoy it and really appreciate you taking the time out to be my second guest, man. You know,
not a problem. You look at you got such a diverse cast. You're off to such a great start. Yeah. I'm always happy to talk to good friends, and you're one of them. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you.
So if we're rounding out, are we rounding out?
Yep.
All right. So I'd say Black Lives Matter. They still matter. And and we appreciate everybody who's been supportive of that. Thank you for a whole community of support, and for the people who do support me on that. Also, your shirt colors are the same shirt colors of my asexuality flag. So that's cool.
Really? Okay.
So happy Pride Month to everybody too.
I was representing today.
Yeah, you didn't even know it. You didn't even know it. That's how I felt when I found out. Like, what? I'm asexual? That's crazy.
That's right. And I didn't even know it.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, is that what that's called? That's called normal. That's called being normal. Like, you shouldn't.
Exactly. Okay.
Like, why would you? It didn't make sense to me. But I was like, oh, okay. If there's a word for it, then fine. Oh, am I part? Do I have to have a flag now? Great, whatever. You're making my whole life upside down. But anyway,
absolutely. All right. So I guess this is the tail end of the show, man. I appreciate everybody who's tuned in to watch us, and enjoy the support. There's going to be new shows every Friday. We're going to try to do panel discussions, try to have different guests. I'll try to my hand at doing some SC again. I did last week with Khalil Allah about his recent conversion to Islam.
Wait, is that his name now?
Yeah, that's his new name. That's right.
Can
Khalil
you make a last name God? Is his last name God? Is his last name literally God?
I guess you can.
Is his name Kill All Allah?
Kill all Allah.
Oh, I'm gonna get murdered, or people are gonna really hate me. I actually have Muslims in my family, by the way, too. I have a very diverse. I got Christian
you were telling me that too.
Witness mom. I got a Muslim sister. So yeah, one thing. I'll have to talk to her about that.
Well, I asked Khalil Allah, kind of a little joke. When the Big Bang happened, did Allah commit suicide? Think about it. Suicide bombings.
No.
Anyway, that was wrong. I know it was wrong.
It was unacceptable.
Right. That was
you
wrong.
Crossed the line, sir.
I sure did. I'm sorry. All right, Katie, are we ready to roll out? You're muted, by the way, Ty. And